This is BBC One in Yorkshire and Lincolnshire. Now the news at 1 o'clock with Darren Jordan and Claire Frisbee.
Soham trial, the jury's told how Holly and Jessica's bodies were discovered by police. The prosecution says the two girls had probably died of asphyxiation. Royal allegations, the arguments over Prince Charles's decision to speak out. Flu alert, a new virus strain is blamed for the deaths of 5 children. Decision day, Dwayne Chambers waits to hear his fate after testing positive for banned steroids.
And on Look North this lunchtime, the government moves into Hull's Guildhall after a second damning report on the way the city's run. And meet the mum who says her son's school is ignoring his dyslexia. Join us in half an hour.
Hello and welcome to the BBC's news at 1 o'clock. The jury in the Soham murder trial has heard that the two 10-year-olds, Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, probably died from asphyxiation. Outlining its case, the prosecution said the girls' bodies had been left in a ditch in a remote area on the night they died. They were found 2 weeks later. Ian Huntley denies murdering the schoolgirls in August last year. Maxine Carr denies conspiring to pervert the course of justice and assisting an offender. Our correspondent Duncan Kennedy has been in court.
Brought to the Old Bailey, but not in court. Ian Huntley was today driven inside the court building, but did not appear in the dock alongside his co-accused Maxine Carr. No explanation was given. Instead, Richard Latham, the prosecutor, began a third day outlining the case against the couple. He first went into more detail about this school hangar in Soham, the place where the clothing of Holly and Jessica was allegedly found. The court has heard that the clothing was inside a bin and that Huntley's fingerprints and hairs matching those on his head were found in the bin. But the jury learned more today about what happened to the David Beckham-style shirts and other clothing the girls were wearing. Their football shirts had been cut in half. Their trainers and other clothing were burnt, and an item of jewellery had been found. At that point, the jury was shown a photograph of Ian Huntley's red Ford Fiesta. In it, say the prosecution, was found a red petrol can and a large pair of scissors. The jury then heard about the moment the two girls' bodies were found, 13 days after they disappeared, half an hour's drive from Soham near the Lakenheath Air Base. Richard Latham went into some detail about the discovery of the bodies, saying this: had they not been discovered on the Saturday, decomposition was such that they may never have been found. He suggested anyone in a blind panic could have found plenty of places to dump the bodies. And he said, "You will consider just how clever is the place they were left. There was a substantial possibility they would never be found." At that point, Mr. Latham said that the most likely cause of death was asphyxia. He said there was no evidence of broken bones or other major bodily trauma, no stab cuts and no blood staining. He said both girls had been found wearing necklaces. The one around Holly's neck had a one-word inscription on it. That word was love. The jury will see the site the bodies were found next week when they travel to the Soham and Lakenheath areas. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News at the Old Bailey.
Well, let's talk to Philippa Thomas, who's at the Old Bailey now. Philippa, it sounds like it's been a harrowing morning in court. What more's been said about how the bodies were found?
Of course, we've heard a lot of detail about the way the bodies were found by members of the public in that deserted ditch. The bodies of Holly and Jessica side by side, as Duncan was saying there, each wearing a necklace. They were identified by DNA and by dental records, and there was a lot of stress placed by the prosecution on the fact that this was such an out-of-the-way spot that the girls might never have been found at all. The prosecution went on to say that they thought it was significant that Ian Huntley's father had lived at a couple of addresses within 2 miles of that site. He also knew another address in the area. We suggest, they said, Ian Huntley knew this area really well. And Richard Latham said whoever dumped these bodies would not have set off down that track in the dark unless they knew exactly where they were going.
And the jury's been hearing more about the state of Ian Huntley's home, Philippa.
That's right. Of course, once Ian Huntley had been arrested, there was a very detailed forensic analysis of the inside of his house. And in fact, what the prosecution says is that not a single head hair or a fingerprint from either of the girls was found there. But the prosecution says it believes that's evidence of what it calls the ultimate spring clean. Richard Latham said this was an exceptionally detailed clean-up in order to try to remove the evidence. But as the session was ending in court, he was just saying that fibres on Ian Huntley's clothes have been found to match the fibres which we used to make those Manchester United shirts.
Philippa, thank you very much. 5 British children have died from a strain of Chinese flu which could spread. The Health Protection Agency has warned GPs and hospitals to be alert for signs of the Fujian virus and says elderly people and others at risk should make sure they're vaccinated.
Don't forget, there's a free flu jab recommended by GPs for everyone.
It's the over 65s who are encouraged to get their flu jabs, but they're not the only ones at risk. Young children can also be badly affected by the virus, and this year doctors are concerned that 5 have already died.
Call your local surgery to book an appointment.
3 of these deaths have been in Scotland, but experts say there's no cause for alarm.
Unfortunately, deaths in any child are regrettable. We have no evidence that there's any increased number over and above what we would normally expect to see each year in children dying of influenza.
Predicting how and when the flu virus will strike is always difficult. During a normal season, between 50 and 200 people in every 100,000 will have flu or flu-like symptoms. Latest figures for England show the rate is about 36 per 100,000, so quite low, but it's early in the season. Compare that to the flu crisis of 1989, when that figure rose to 600. Now, in recent years, it's the Panama flu strain that's been circulating in Britain. But lab tests show this year it's a Fujian-like strain which has come from China.
In Australia, in their most recent winter, they saw flu activity, and a lot of that was associated with this Fujian strain. The level of the activity they saw, as best as we can tell, was increased. There were certainly problems with flu, but not very large epidemic levels.
Those getting their flu jabs today will get some protection, even against this new strain. Family doctors have been reminded to offer vaccinations to those most at risk, the elderly and children with serious illnesses. Vicky Young, BBC News.
The Prince of Wales has carried on with business as usual this morning after his office issued a statement denying an allegation about him made by a former royal servant. Clarence House has described the allegations as untrue and ludicrous. A spokesman for Prince Charles, who's currently in the Gulf state of Oman, said he would not be distracted by events at home.
His presence in Oman has suddenly become the subject of intense interest, but for what his officials would say are all the wrong reasons. The Prince of Wales has identified himself as the senior royal at the centre of an allegation which has been swirling around media circles for many months. This morning's newspapers report the categorical denial of the allegation issued last night on Charles's behalf by his private secretary. But the nature of the allegation still cannot be published because it is the subject of a High Court injunction.
I think your viewers and my readers are pretty fed up with this. They know that we know something and we're not allowed to tell them. They want to know what it is. All right, they now know the palace says it's not true, and perhaps they want to judge for themselves.
All that can be said at the moment is that the person who has made the allegation is a former royal servant who is believed to be George Smith, a former footman. A second former royal servant, the Prince of Wales's ex-valet, Michael Fawcett, is the man who on Saturday obtained the High Court injunction which prevented the Mail on Sunday from publishing Mr. Smith's allegation. All of which leaves many questions unanswered, not least whether Clarence House was wise to issue a statement which has excited such public curiosity.
The allegations were out there. They were well known in the media. They've been buzzing around for some time. They are now on the internet. They are now in an Italian newspaper. They are heading for these shores. They will come out sooner or later. They are very, very damaging. They are untrue, and I think it was absolutely right for the Prince of Wales to knock it on the head.
For the heir to the throne, then, another painful experience involving another former member of staff. His officials insist he's resigned to being the target of bizarre allegations, which, they insist, are totally without foundation. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.